Hi, everyone, and welcome. I'm Troy Lambert, the education lead for Plottr, and today we're going to talk about the revised version of the Sleuth's Journey template. Now, what is the Sleuth's Journey? Well, back in 2017, I was in a class at LTUE with a guy named Dave Farland. We were talking about story structure, and I wondered if there was a way that I could adapt the hero's journey, the popular hero's journey template, to a Sleuth's Journey. So I started to do that, and I came up with the Sleuth's Journey that I really created for my own fiction and created for myself. But everybody that saw it said, that's really useful. I'd like to have that too. So we developed it into a Plottr template, and since that time, we've revised it a couple of times and come up with an even better version of the Sleuth's Journey. So today, we're going to take a look at that. With that, let's jump right in. All right. The first beat is about the sleuth's ordinary world. Now, the ordinary world does not have to be boring. In fact, the sleuth's ordinary world probably rarely is. Think about movies that you've seen like James Bond and John Wick and thrillers like that that start with some kind of an action. They often help create the setting that tell you where the story takes place, what time period the story is set in, and gives the reader a sense of what is happening in this story or what kind of action is going to happen to this story. We also show the character and reveal their job. Are they a private eye? Are they a cop? Are they a photographer? Are they a novelist? Who is this person? Now, we want to develop a character that people want to follow throughout the whole book. We want to showcase the sleuth's comfort in their everyday life and activities, but kind of throw a hitch in it. Something bad is going to happen, and that's really what this story is going to be about. Now, if this is a series, those elements, if like this is the second book in a series, those elements can be reintroduced for readers that are new to it. And they should be, so that people can read each book as a standalone without having to read the rest of the series. Now, we also are going to look at the villain's ordinary world. Now, the villain's journey is a completely optional plot line. If you're not showing the villain's journey in your story, you don't have to show this at all. But if you are, you're also going to show the villain's ordinary world. Okay, you're going to show where they come from and what they are doing and what kind of criminal they are and what their ordinary world looks like, and something that displeases them. A lot of times this is a misbelief that the villain has, and this may be similar or different to a misbelief that your protagonist has. This is what's going to cause your conflict in the story. It's not just that one person's on one side of the law and the other person's on the other side, but it's about a personality conflict and something that makes this even more personal. Now, the other thing we're going to start with is the B story opening. A lot of times there's a romance that's included in a sleuth's journey. That's actually a really great way to add tension to your fiction, and romance also softens your genre. If you have a really dark and rugged mystery, sometimes that B story and that romance can make that just a little softer and more palatable for more readers. Okay. But here we're going to see whatever that is, whether that is a family dynamic, whether that is a budding romance or another mystery or case that's happening at the same time as the main storyline that might also be related. Okay. So the B story is going to start here as well. Now, in beat number 2, if beat number 1's all about the ordinary world, beat number 2 is all about disruption. Everyone's world is going to be disrupted in this beat. At the same time, we're going to give you some great clues that are going to lead to the solution of the mystery later on. Okay, the first thing that's disrupted is the sleuth's world is disrupted. Okay, so the sleuth learns of the crime. They learn something about the crime, and their world is disrupted because they're hired to solve the case, they're assigned the case, or they're somehow drawn into the investigation. Now, that may not be fully drawn into the investigation yet, but they're going to be involved somehow. Now, there should be one clue. Remember, we're going to leave you some clues, so there should be one clue that the sleuth receives that will play a role later in the mystery. If you're a discovery writer, you can say, I don't know what these clues are yet. That's fine. You can come back and add them during the revision process. You don't have to know all of this information before you start writing your mystery, because if you're a discovery writer, we don't want to take away the joy of and the creativity of that zero draft that you have there. Now, remember, in the case of an amateur sleuth, they need to have a motive to get involved that's probably a little bit that's stronger than a police officer, and officials like police and others also need to have a motive for involving them, unless that's part of the conflict. Maybe the police don't want them involved and they get involved anyway, or something along that line. But remember that there needs to be a specific motive there. Remember, means, motive, and opportunity, those are all going to play a role, and we're going to talk about those later. Now, the victim's world is disrupted. If they're murdered, well, their world is disrupted because they dead. Now, but they don't have to be dead. It doesn't have to be a murder. This is just for murder mysteries. They can be robbed, assaulted, whatever the case may be, kidnapped, whatever happens to them. Okay. Now, this beat should include at least one unique trait, so the reader cares about the victim right away. Otherwise, why do we want to read the story if we don't care that they died or that they were taken advantage of in some other way? So be sure there's something that draws us as the reader to them and allows us to have empathy with them. We're going to build on that empathy as we move through the story, but it needs to start right away. Okay. The villain's world is also disrupted. Their world is disrupted because as soon as they commit a crime, they have to go on the defensive, at least to a certain extent. They have to get away with the crime now, and that becomes their goal. Now, they usually have other personal goals, other misbeliefs that are underneath that as well, but this establishes the central issue of the story. What is the central crime that's going to take place, and what action does the villain take to push them beyond the point of no return? In other words, they commit a crime. They may have been thinking about committing a crime. Now they actually did. So how do these actions make the villain clearly a villain? The villain can be kind of a morally gray villain, that maybe what they did isn't so bad, or maybe they had some kind of a justification for it. But for a detective to have a reason to go after them, it still has to be something illegal or that's wrong. Okay? So the villain's world is disrupted. The B story is also disrupted. This could be the instance where the detective was supposed to go and show up for an anniversary dinner or a family birthday party or something like that. And because he learns about the case, that disrupts his plan for the B story, whatever that plan may have been. Now, this is going to happen a few different times throughout the story, and that's going to help you create some tension in the story and also show us more about the detective's character and what they care about the most. Do they care more about work, or do they care more about family and the things that should be important to them? Okay. Now, once we've disrupted everyone's world, then we have our detective who is reluctant to take the case. Now, sometimes they can be reluctant to take the case because of what happened when the B story was disrupted. Other times they can be reluctant to take the case for other reasons. Maybe they don't feel qualified. Maybe they don't want to dive into the investigation. If the sleuth is a detective, maybe because they don't want the case, or they're about to retire, or they fear they won't be given the case in some cases. Okay. So often them refusing to take the case is not even their call if they're a detective. It's somebody else's call. Like, they don't really have a choice, but we're going to make it seem like they do. The sleuth can hesitate. They can refuse the call more than once. If they do refuse the case more than once, raise the stakes after each time they refuse and make it harder and harder for them to say no. Okay. Include their emotional reaction to this refusal. How are they reacting emotionally to this? Does this make them feel guilty, angry, annoyed? A lot of times the same reason that makes them not want to take the case ends up being their motive to take the case, at least initially. So we're going to force them to take the case at the end of this particular beat. Okay. Now, the next beat is also optional. Beat 4, much like the victim's journey, is optional. We don't always have to show a partner in the case. Okay. But most of the time we do. And the partner doesn't necessarily have to be a partner that works directly with them. It can be someone that's a little distance, but this is kind of like the mentor. It's someone that they seek for advice, that may balance out their bad traits with some good traits, that may give them some more confidence, that they may have some impressive skills that the detective needs. Something along that line, okay? But this is going to be someone that goes with them during the case, even if they're someone that typically goes solo. Even if we think about Jack Reacher, he always has members of his team that he brings in that help him out during his stories, okay? So it's similar to that. It's not always a direct partner, but it's someone that helps them along their path. Okay. At the same time, if we are showing the villain's journey, we're going to show the criminal preparation. Okay. So we're going to show the criminal preparing to get away with the crime or maybe commit another crime. Okay. So basically, sometimes the sleuth, we can hint at this if we're not showing the villain's POV. We can show the detective being drawn into another case that might be related, something like that. It can be related to the new partner, and the villain might even know the new partner. So the new partner may end up being someone that betrays them. There's all kinds of things that you could do with that part of the story. But again, both the parts of this beat number 4, are optional. You don't have to have either one of them to make your mystery work. But when we get to beat 5, at some point, we have to set the sleuth on the path. In other words, this is where they go from reluctantly accepting the case to the fact that they're all in and they want to investigate. So we have to give them a reason to do that. So we need to answer the question, what causes the sleuth to become more interested in the case? Is it a bonus for a PI, a whole bunch of cash that he really desperately needs? Is it an assignment from their boss that they can't do anything about? Or maybe it's something personal. This is usually the best thing, even if they have some of these other reasons for being involved. If something personal draws them into the case and causes them, even at this point, to start empathizing with the victim, then that is one of the best drivers to keep your character moving through the story, so that they'll have a reason to continue even when they're being shot at or knocked around the head or whatever the case may be. Okay. Now, ensure the sleuth's character is well developed and they respond in a way that aligns with their character. If you don't know their character type, you can use the Enneagram or any number of character templates that we have in Plottr to flesh out that character so that you understand how they would react to specific situations. The better you know their backstory, the better you know how they would react to situations, the better story you can build. Okay. This is the point also where we're going to have an empathy trigger. Now, I put this on the victim's journey because this is something that the detective is going to learn about the victim that's going to make them empathize with them. They're going to feel the same feelings that that character feels. Okay. And that's going to cause them to be more driven to pursue the story. So that's what we talked about when we talked about setting the sleuth on the path, is that empathy trigger that gets them to really want to solve this problem. Now, what that results in usually is the end of the beginning in the B story. The decision to take the case spells the end of the original plan for the B story. Whatever anniversary trip they were planning, whatever time they were planning with their family or their wife or whatever, at this point, that is all blown apart, and it's blown apart because of the case. So be sure you always tie this back to the main plot line and the case. So this spells a little bit of a disaster for the B story. Okay. But our detective continues to the first erroneous conclusion. Now, you can have more than one erroneous conclusion, more than one try-fail. And depending upon the length of your story, you might have a few of these at this point. These can be red herrings, suspects that end up being cleared, something like that. But the main thing is we're directing the investigation towards a conclusion, some kind of conclusion that the detective is assuming is correct, and that proves to be wrong. Now, sometimes that means that this crime is not what it at first appeared to be, something along that line, okay? But be sure you place a clue the sleuth does not realize is important, but pays off later. Again, if you're a discovery writer, you can come back and do this later. But this is something you're going to want to fulfill and wrap up once you get to the third act and the final act of this story. So introduce a challenge to showcase how dangerous this case is. Remember, putting your detective in danger is a good thing. That helps your reader identify with them and want to follow them. They become empathetic with the character and they feel that risk themselves. Okay. In some cases, someone can die here. And that often provides a clue that the sleuth uses later on. There could be another murder, or other relationships can be not what they seem, or a relationship can die and end, and that's another way that you can use this as well. Note that this is an opportunity to add more characters to the story, including a rival detective team, old friends, even potential suspects, whatever the case may be. If you're going to add additional suspects and characters, it really needs to happen here at this point, no later than here. Okay. Now plan the character development of the supporting characters to ensure they're strong characters as well. Develop their personalities. Give them something unique and distinct about them that the reader can identify with. What are their goals, motivations, and strategies? They may not always align with those of the sleuth, even though they may help him anyway, but for their own personal gain and their own personal reasons. Okay. So that's the first erroneous conclusion. Okay. Then we're going to learn some facts about the suspect. So what's going to happen next is, and sometimes at the same time as the detective's going to learn more about the suspects, that's going to cause some of them to be cleared and some of them to move to the top of his list. Okay. The detective is not always right at this point. In fact, they are usually still wrong at this point. This is a great place to take those characters that we just introduced and let the reader learn more about them and even elevate their status as suspects. Okay. Add suspicion to one or more of them. Provide the sleuth with some false leads to follow, mixed with some clues that actually do mean something. Okay. Now, this is where the first try fail in the B story happens, if you have one. Now, in this particular case, what happens is this adds tension. As the detective finds out more about the suspects, something happens in his personal life that draws him away from those suspects, or maybe even someone in his personal life in that B story becomes a suspect. But this adds tension for the main character. Remember, this B story is always tied to the A story. It always disrupts and adds tension to the main plot. Okay, so after this, we move on to beat 8 and we broaden the investigation. Now, broadening the investigation doesn't always mean adding more suspects, but it means that we look at more motives. We look at more opportunities. So we start taking a different look at this, at the case itself. The detective starts to look at their abilities and have faith in their abilities. But by the end of this, the protagonist is entirely separated from the ordinary world, and they've survived some kind of an event that reaffirms their commitment to going after this case. Now, broaden the investigation. You can put suspicion on the other characters by changing the motives that the detective think is happening, by changing the opportunity window, perhaps, and even changing the means that was used to kill the person. This can be where he learned it wasn't poison like it first appeared. Maybe it was an arrow. Maybe it was a drug overdose. Something like that. Allow the sleuth or perhaps a partner to make a plan that could potentially solve the case. So they think they're on the right track. They think they're headed the right direction, and they make a plan that they're fairly confident about. They're fairly confident they are on the right track. Okay? So that's where we broaden the investigation. Now, this is another place where we add another empathy trigger for the sleuth and the victim. Information gathered through these interviews or the discovery of physical evidence reveals new facts about the victim, sometimes a different way that they died, something like that, like we just mentioned. And this allows the detective to flesh out their character. So the reader is reminded to care about the victim. Okay, remember, it's all about the reader caring about, not only about the detective and wanting him to solve the crime, but caring about the victim and wanting justice for them. Okay, so that's what happens when we broaden the investigation and we tie the sleuth again to the victim. Now we have the sleuth's background. Now, this is the midpoint of the B story, and this is often how we find out something about the sleuth's background is through the interaction with this B story. We learn something about their past. We learn something about their other relationships. We learn something about their background that establishes what drives them, number one, what haunts them, what might be missing in their life, and how that relates to the victim in this particular case and causes them to drive towards solving this particular case. Now, make it clear that the sleuth has a personal stake in the outcome, either because of threat to life or the possibility of a revelation of matters deeply disturbing to them on an emotional level or something like that. Okay. Highlight their strengths and weaknesses. What are the strengths that come in from that background that we learned about the detective? But what about the weaknesses? What makes them vulnerable? What about their relationships, drinking, drugs, or some other kind of obsession? Okay. This weakness should play into their struggles to solve the case and their struggles with the B story. Now, allow the sleuth to empathize with the victim or their family again, this time related to their own deep-seated issues. And sometimes this is where they put the victim and their needs as a priority over their own family. Okay. And over their own B story. Okay. So that's what happens here. Then we get to the actual midpoint of the story and we have a change of focus. Now we call this trifail 2. It can be whatever number of trifail it needs to be, but this is a major trifail in the case. The sleuth has a plan. They have a personal reason to solve the case, but now they have to face the test of, is this actually the path that I am on? Okay, they're on the wrong track, and we're going to dramatize through a painful sacrifice, the death of someone close to them, maybe a new victim, maybe something happens to the victim or their family, and it's going to shake their faith in themselves and their solution. Okay, remember, this is an emotional, mental, or physical work that the sleuth has to do to rebound from defeat. Okay, it's best if it's all of those things. If they have a physical setback, they have an emotional setback, and they have a mental setback, that all cause them to pause. Okay. Now the sleuth is transformed into a stronger, more powerful version because they have renewed confidence in their abilities, not by the end of this beat, but as we move through the next couple of beats. Okay. This is also the villain's midpoint. Because this is our protagonist's dark moment, this is almost a climax for the villain. They are excited. It seems like they're going to get away with things. It seems like the detective is wrong in their pursuit of them, and our villain is going to triumph, and they're going to get away. Okay. So it's really important to remember that the villain's character arc is opposite of that of our protagonist normally. Okay. But what's going to happen in our next beat if we're going to reveal hidden motives? Okay. The sleuth has really been put through it at the midpoint of our story, and now things turn around for them, or at least so it seems. This is kind of a false victory. The motive for the crime they were chasing may have been wrong, but new previously hidden motives are revealed, and they're like, oh, I am on to it now. Some secret relationships can come to light, like business arrangements, family, things like that. So this can come to light in a number of ways, but it should be a result of the action that the sleuth took. Remember, this is a point where now they're being proactive. They're pursuing the crime. They're not reacting to things that are happening to them. Show them acquiring new clues to the actual motive for the crime. This could be any number of things that it can be a new clue. Okay. But this is a great place to drop a clue and indicate how this clue is central and a critical part of the solution of the crime. Now, the detective can be and probably is wrong about why that clue is significant, but we need to hang a bell on it, make sure that the reader understands this is important. So other clues that previously didn't mean anything, now they can start to mean something in light of this clue. Even if the detective is still wrong about exactly what they mean, we know that they come together to mean something. So this is another moment to allow the detective to just celebrate their cleverness. I am so clever, and I'm on the road to this story because we're going to mess with them really hard, because the next thing that we're going to move to is the impossible solution. Okay. And these beats can overlap a little bit or be pretty close together, but the true motive is now clear. There's still issues that the sleuth must face. He has to make sense of all these clues to kind of narrow this down to one suspect. And the solution seems difficult, if not impossible. He can go, well, there's all this evidence, but I can't tie it together. I don't know what the common thread is. Okay. So also use this section to reconfirm the danger and urgency of solving the case. If there was a ticking clock, make that clock even louder at this point. It's also a good time to remind the reader of the central dramatic question that started the sleuth on their journey in the first place. The danger faced by the sleuth may act as a turning point, creating an unexpected turn or a twist in the story. Okay. Maybe now the detective also has something physical to overcome that is pretty significant, that is going to hamper them in their investigation. Okay. But either way, everything seems impossible. But now we're going to move into beat 13 and 14. Now these are very fast beats. They can overlap or be really close together. The sleuth made a wrong assumption about motive. He may have known what the true motive was, but he made a wrong assumption about why the person had that motive, or even who had that motive. This caused them to take a wrong turn in the investigation. Now they realize that, and they work to correct it. The crucial evidence is something they overlooked in Act 1. So remember those clues we planted back there, or that you as discovery writers are going to go back and plant in Act 1? This is where those clues start to pay off. They appeared to be something that didn't really matter. It was of little consequence. It was just something that was dropped in the text, but it takes on new meaning here. Okay, so it's the obvious and inevitable conclusion. Okay, have the sleuth review the case to determine where they went wrong and reveal the chain of events that provoked the crime. At this point, we don't necessarily know who did it. Okay, but we do know that there's a foundation here that's going to allow us to solve the case. Okay, so once we reveal the wrong turn, we're going to see that the villain, if we're showing their point of view, that they realize that there has been a wrong turn and that the detective is now on the right track. The detective may not know who they are, but they have an idea that the detective may know who they are. And so now they are on the run. They're frustrated. They're angry that they may get caught and may not get away with it. And they're kind of losing hope and make them desperate for success. That's what causes them to make the final errors that allow our detective to catch them. Okay, is that they get a little bit cocky and then they lose that hope and they're like, oh man, now I'm on the run, and their plan is shot. Okay, so they're going to make mistakes. Okay, but at the same time, because we're not going to leave our protagonist alone for very long and let him just think about things, we're going to create a crisis in the B story. And that crisis is going to be directly related to the wrong turn in the A story. Okay. So if the wrong turn was something about family or relationships, then this crisis that happens is going to happen in the detective's relationships. It's going to directly relate to that, and it's going to draw them away from being able to act on the wrong turn that they know has come into their view. However, they are going to leave the B story. Whatever is wrong there, they're going to leave the B story and they're going to move on, because now the sleuth has answers. So it's often by this B story event that happens to them that they realize the truth of the A story. Now, we're not going to reveal to the reader here exactly what has happened, but the sleuth has taken what they've learned in the last two beats. They weigh the evidence and information they have been given, and now they look to prove the conclusion they've already come to. They'll often come to this conclusion in the scene of the B story crisis and leave that crisis to come pursue this, because now they've got a solution for the case. Okay. They don't know the answer for sure, but they have proof that they have an idea of how to get the proof that they need. Okay. Based on what only they know, they seek positive proof to back up what the conclusion is that we don't know yet. Okay. So have them weigh the information and the evidence gleaned from other characters. This is a really fast beat. And we'll be sure at this point, the reader generally does not know the answer, but they can feel it coming. If they can feel it coming, they will continue reading to get it. Okay. Now the sleuth has answers. Now we have the final reveal. Okay. Once the sleuth has the answer, this beat shows them finding the final clue or the final proof that they need to solve the crime, and they reveal it to the reader. Now the reader knows what's going on. The clue should fulfill a promise made in Act 1. Again, if you're a discovery writer, you can go back and refine this promise in the revision process, but be sure that there was a promise you made in Act 1 about the way this story was going to turn out. And even though that may have been subtle and it may have been a hint at this point, this is where the reader feels satisfied that that loose end is wrapped up and all the other loose ends are wrapped up. The red herrings are no longer a factor. We know who did it. This is another quick beat. You can combine it with the previous one. So those can be within a couple pages of each other. It can happen really fast. The only thing left after this is to catch the villain in the final confrontation or chase scene that often happens in this part of the story. Okay. Everybody knows the answer now. Be sure that the clues have all led up to the solution, that you've resolved all the false clues that you planted along the way and shown them to be false at this point. Okay. So the final reveal, and then the last one is that the criminal is caught. Or they may not be caught, they may just be defeated depending upon the type of series that you're writing. This is the true climax of the story. This is the final and most dangerous encounter between the sleuth and the villain. This is the definitive and greatest test of the sleuth's determination to solve the case. Remember, ping out their emotions related to the case too. With the solution in his hand, it's time for them to confront the villain. Often alone, they're often one-on-one at that point. With time running out, the clock again is ticking, the pressure is at its highest point, and the sleuth either captures the villain or defeats them. But a lot of times, in order to do so, there's a sacrifice involved. A partner is shot, someone is injured, something valuable is lost, even something bad can happen in that B story. So dramatize this final showdown, make it the big deal that it is. This is what your reader's been waiting for. But show the emotional change in the sleuth and how that change has helped them to solve the case and will help them in their life going forward. And prepare the sleuth to return to some kind of normal again. Now, this is not going to be the normal that they were before. Okay, there's going to be some change. But establish the case has been solved and justice has been served, or if justice has not been served, that is, it will potentially be served at some later point when the criminal is caught later on, if they have run away. Now, for the villain, we call this ordeal, death, and rebirth. They make a choice. Either they die or they're caught and it becomes an ordeal for them. They're thrown in jail or put on trial, whatever the case may be, or it's a rebirth. They decide that they are going to turn towards the good and away from the bad, and this gives them an opportunity to do that. The villain's journey closely mirrors the hero's journey. The villain does not have a reward, a homecoming, or an opportunity to relax in a new world they've created unless they end up in a jail cell, which I guess could be relaxing. But they've been defeated, and they're sort of sent off to lick their wounds and devise another plan if this is a series. Okay? So, ordeal, death, and rebirth. Now, there's also a climax of the B story. Just understand that if you're writing a mystery and the mystery is the primary plot, that the subplot does not have to have a happy ending like a typical romance does, and often in detective stories it doesn't. They've learned lessons, but maybe what they've learned about themselves is that they do indeed love their jobs more than they love their families, and so that it doesn't necessarily work out for them. But there is a resolution here of some sort, one way or the other, either for the good or for the bad of that main character. Okay, so the only thing left is the denouement. Those of you who don't know what a denouement is, basically this is the return to the ordinary world. We saw the sleuth is now a changed person. Now, whether that's good or bad for the B story, it's generally good for the detective and his future in his career or whatever the case may be. So they return to the normal world. Their normal world, again, doesn't have to be boring. It can be something that's pretty exciting. It can be a new case, whatever the case may be. Especially if this is a series, you can use that to hint at what's going to happen in the next book. There's also a final image and resolution of the B story. If we didn't resolve it completely in the climax, we resolve it here. We either see the detective going his separate ways, moving out of his family home, or we see them being reunited, having dinner together, spending time together, whatever the case may be. And that, everyone, is the revised version of the sleuth's journey. Remember, you don't have to use every single beat or every single plot line in this story, and you can also use it as a subplot for other genres, and it's a way to add mystery to your particular story. Thanks, everyone, for joining us. Let us know in the comments if you have any questions. And if you like this kind of content, you want to learn more about the templates that Plottr has as a part of the software, hit that subscribe button so you don't ever miss an update, and be sure you hit that notifications bell as well. And with that, thanks, everyone, for joining us, and we'll see you next time.